Today, unusually, I think I'm going to be discussing in most detail over the course of this program a political event which is not directly involving Ukraine, which is to say the fall of Prime Minister Boris Johnson of Great Britain. But before I do that, I am going to talk about the situation in Ukraine briefly, because as I have said in many programs now, this is a global crisis. Its epicenter is Ukraine, but it is having effects on every part of the world. And the crisis that has overwhelmed Boris Johnson is connected directly to that global crisis, which is focused on Ukraine. So let's start with the situation in Ukraine. A couple of days ago, we had the fall of Lysychansk, the last major city controlled by Ukraine in Lugansk region. The Russians and their allies have captured Lysychansk and the area around it. They've captured hundreds of square kilometers of territory, and they're now in full control of the entirety of Lugansk region. Now, since that dramatic news of the fall of Lysychansk, it's become increasingly clear that there are still large numbers of Ukrainian troops located throughout this territory. They're not organized. They're not offering any organized resistance to the Russians. Most of them seem to be trying to find their way back to Ukrainian lines. But there are apparently, even as I speak, still Ukrainian troops in some places east of the Seversky Donetsk River. In other words, in the area around Severodonetsk, which fell to the Russians before the capture of Lysychansk. So this gives you a sense of how, in some ways, rapid this capture of Lysychansk was. It's left large numbers of Ukrainian troops behind, cut off from their main bases, cut off from their command positions. And one of the things that the Russians have to do is that they have to find all these people, track them down over a very large territory, take them to prisoner of war camps, process them, do all those sort of things. In other words, this territory is still not yet fully consolidated. And that will probably take at least a couple more days. And eventually, of course, it will be consolidated and brought firmly under Russian control. Whilst I'm on this topic, I would say that this isn't a new development in the Ukraine war, that the Russians capture territory and have to spend time rounding up Ukrainian troops who have been left behind. The same thing happened in Mariupol, and specifically in the Azovstal steelworks. You may all remember how resistance in the Azovstal steelworks collapsed, how the Azov regiment and the other Ukrainian troops in the Azovstal steelworks undertook a mass surrender, and how the Russians took literally thousands of prisoners when that happened. Well, what has not been widely publicized is that some Ukrainian soldiers, I don't know how many, but certainly several, perhaps a dozen, perhaps a score, perhaps more than that, refused to surrender and continued to hide in the various bunkers and tunnels and those things under the Azovstal steelworks. And for some time thereafter, Russian special forces had to comb through these bunkers and tunnels to find these people and either to capture them or possibly to kill them. So this didn't quite end when it was said to have ended, and this fighting around Lysychansk hasn't quite ended when it formally ended. As I said, there are still people to round up before this territory is fully consolidated and can be said to be fully under Russian control. And of course, Putin said that the troops who captured Lysychansk and presumably Severodonetsk have to rest, but other Russian troops have continued operations, and we're getting now reports that the Russians have been creeping steadily closer towards the town of Siversk in the north of Donetsk region, and also the town of Bakhmut further south, and of course the two main centers of Ukrainian forces in Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. The Russians are very close to all of these places, but following the pattern that the Russians have shown throughout all the fighting that they've engaged in Donbass, the Russians do not carry out direct assaults on these towns. What they try to do is that they first take one settlement after another near these towns, cut off the roads or reduce the ability of the Ukrainians to keep their troops in these towns supplied, and steadily, gradually, they make the position of the Ukrainian troops in these towns untenable, and of course they carry out extremely heavy artillery preparation, and then when Ukrainian resistance has been undermined, only then do the Russians send in the infantry, who, when they are committed, are able to sweep through these towns very quickly and at minimum losses. Now, I recently read an article in the New York Times, and may I first of all say, pass on my debt to Jeff Roberts, the prominent historian, who's the person who sent it to me. This article speaks about growing concern in Ukraine amongst Ukrainian soldiers at this tactic that Ukraine has been pursuing of trying to hold on to all of these towns, and it talks about the very heavy material losses and human losses that Ukraine has been suffering. Now, the New York Times article talks about how the Russians are also suffering heavy losses and about how exhausting this kind of artillery war is for both sides. Now, that may be true, but of course one has to make one very quick observation. We know a fair amount now about Ukrainian losses, because the Ukrainians have recently become rather more forthcoming in telling us about the number of people that they're losing every day. That the Ukrainian army loses around 1,000 men, dead or wounded, every day. Now, we have far less information about the level of casualties that the Russians are experiencing. So saying that the Russians are also suffering heavy losses comparable to those of Ukraine is only a supposition. It's a guess. And it's a guess that obviously to some extent it comes from Western intelligence agencies, but one can't avoid the impression that they're largely relying on guesses and information provided by Ukraine. The BBC recently carried out another survey, and they found evidence that 4,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in Ukraine and have been buried in Russian cemeteries and such places. This is a very crude figure. It's likely that Russian losses are higher, but assuming that it gives us a sort of overall picture of what Russian losses are, they don't seem to be anywhere close to the kind of losses that Ukraine is suffering. And I think that is an important point to say. If it is attrition, it is attrition that is working to Russia's advantage. And perhaps this is getting to be more acknowledged or better recognized. We've had a whole series of articles now appearing in the Western media, which appear for the first time to be acknowledging that Ukraine is suffering increasingly high losses in the war, and that the Russians seem to be winning the war of attrition. There was a recent article, for example, in the Daily Telegraph, which has been perhaps the most gung-ho pro-Ukrainian newspaper in Britain. The article was entitled, "For the Ukrainians, time is running out." And that is suggestive in itself. That's a curious admission in itself, but it's an interesting title, and it shows how, especially since the fall of Lysychansk, there's been a darkening of the mood. And by the way, that New York Times article, which Jeff Roberts informed me about, it makes the same point, that there's been a darkening of the mood, but this time it specifically refers to Ukraine itself. There's been a general, one senses, lowering of morale across Ukraine. And what we further learn, what we further see, is how Ukraine continues to seek, if you like, PR victories to make up for the ground that it's losing. So we hear once again, and this New York Times article talks once again about incremental Ukrainian advances in Kherson region. Except I've been poring over maps of the battles around Kherson region. I'm not going to pretend that I'm a good person at reading maps. I'm not. But I don't see any change there, any significant change there. And other people who've been following the fighting in Kherson region say the same thing. And in fact, one sometimes sees a minor Ukrainian advance, capturing one village here. Only the Ukrainians get pushed back. And that advance is usually counterbalanced by another Russian advance in the same area. But overall, my overwhelming impression is of a static situation near Kherson. And certainly the maps just do not correspond with the claim that I read also in the Daily Telegraph that the Ukrainians are within sight of Kherson city. I mean, that is certainly not the case. It doesn't correspond with any information from the battlefields which I have seen. On the contrary, the information suggests a static situation with occasional Ukrainian attacks, which then get repulsed after Ukraine has suffered heavy losses. And we've seen another attempt to stage a PR maneuver in Snakes Island. I spoke the other day about how it was simply not the case that Ukraine had raised the Ukrainian flag over Kherson Island. They dropped the flag there from a helicopter. Well, they did try, as many people had predicted, to stage a photo op. They sent Ukrainian troops, apparently, to Kherson to Snakes Island in order to stage an event with the Ukrainian flag, except the Russians immediately got wind of it. The Ukrainian troops were subjected to very heavy shelling and bombing. Several of them apparently were killed, and they all had to pull back almost immediately. So a photo op that didn't work, but which may have cost lives, and certainly appears to have cost injuries, and unequivocally caused a hurried retreat. So we see these sort of things going on. Now, I talked about the fact that there's growing criticisms in Ukraine of this policy of trying to cling on to towns and cities in Donbass, which are undefendable. But all the indications are that Ukraine is still doing this. And the latest reports are that 2 HIMARS systems, perhaps the 2 last remaining HIMARS systems, given that the Russians claim, and I believe correctly claim, that they've destroyed already the two others that were previously supplied to Ukraine. Anyway, that the two remaining HIMARS systems have now been deployed to defend Siversk. In other words, instead of being pulled back from the front line, they're being brought to the front line where they will be easier for the Russians to find and destroy. And Ukraine is continuing to send reinforcements to try to defend Siversk, just as it sent reinforcements to Severodonetsk, just as it sent reinforcements to Lysychansk, only making the defeat in both of these places even worse than it might otherwise have been. Now, again, I don't see the military logic of this strategy, especially given that, as the New York Times article confirms, these troops are increasingly ill-trained because Ukraine has been running out of trained troops. Whereas, by the way, the Russian troops remain entirely professionals. Another fact, which, by the way, suggests to me that Russian losses are not anywhere near as great as people in the West appear to believe. So you're throwing poorly trained men into battle, and you're deploying your best, or at least the weapon systems that you're claiming are going to reverse the battle, into a position of vulnerability, all to defend Siversk. Again, I don't understand the logic, and again, one sees, it's good to see at least that there's increasing numbers of people in Ukraine who are questioning the logic as well. Well, I have setting no timelines for any particular battle. Some people said optimistically that Siversk would fall today. That's clearly not going to happen. As I said, the Russians are not going to rush into Siversk. They're going to do what they have always done, cut it off from resupply, and then move in and take it over after it's been shelled, or at least the Ukrainian troops have been shelled into defeat. But that, I think, is the pattern of the war. So then it'll be Siversk. After Siversk, it'll be Bakhmut. After Bakhmut, it'll be Slavyansk. And then the Russians will move on to Kramatorsk. And then, to all intents and purposes, in all essential respects, the Battle of Donbass will be over. How long this process is going to take, I don't know. But July, August, we will no doubt continue to see this working its way out incrementally. Now, what about that great Ukrainian counteroffensive we've been hearing so much about for so long, and which is supposedly being prepared? Well, Die Welt, a German newspaper, is saying that actual military supplies to Ukraine from the West are now falling. I don't know whether that's true or not. Certainly they have not been on anything like the scale that it seems to me would be needed to reverse the course of this war. And if they were, how are the Ukrainians going to train up to use all these Western weapons in the few weeks left to them before autumn and winter start to close in? So I am becoming increasingly skeptical about this great Ukrainian counteroffensive. By the end of August, it seems to me that the chances of it taking place are dwindling. Now, that was perhaps the situation with the Ukrainians. There's been some talk about the Russians, and there's been a lot of focus in the media in the West about two bills that have passed through the Russian parliament, which some people think talk about the Russians putting their entire economy on a war footing. I think this is reading too much into those bills, those two bills which are now being presented to the Russian parliament. I don't think that's what they really say. One of them talks about the fact that private businesses have to accept military orders Well, that seems to me a sensible precaution in this type of conflict. I think this is the sort of thing that usually happens when a country is in conflict. I don't think that it talks about or necessarily points to a mobilization economy. And of course, it may come to that if the war drags on, and maybe if the West intervenes in some more dramatic way. But I think people need to be a bit careful not to look for evidence of a Russian industrial and military mobilization and search around for clues as to that happening, and dealing with two rather minor bills and interpreting them in that way. It seems to me that this is a precautionary law which will help the Russian military if they need it, but I don't think it necessarily proves that they are going to need it, or if they are going to start imposing contracts on Russian suppliers, that this is going to make things dramatically different from what they already are. Now, in saying all of that, of course, we may see, but for what it's worth, the Russian economics minister, Maxim Reshetnikov, says that the condition of the economy, the Russian economy overall, is continuing to improve. He's careful not to give too many figures, so we don't know how great the improvement is, but he says that there was deflation in Russia throughout June, and it's continued in the first week of July, which is to say that prices have been falling as they adjust back to the levels that they had before the brief explosion of prices which took place in the first week of March. And he also says, and perhaps this is even more important, that demand in the Russian consumer market has now recovered to February levels, in other words, to the same level that we saw before the war. So all that points to a steadying of the economy, stabilization of the Russian economy going forward. I stress again, Reshetnikov was careful not to give away too much in terms of figures. The Russians are wary not to give away information about the state of their economy, which might lead to more sanctions attacks. But for what it's worth, he seems to be talking about an improving picture. Well, if it is indeed an improving picture in Russia itself, and, perhaps Reshetnikov is being economical with the truth about that, it's certainly a deteriorating picture here in Britain. And if you want to understand why Prime Minister Boris Johnson has now finally fallen, let me repeat again. It's not these scandals that have brought him down. Other prime ministers have survived scandals. I can remember back in the early 1990s, the early to mid 1990s, that the then British Prime Minister, John Major, ran a government that was beset by scandal, and yet he went on to lead the Conservatives into the 1997 general election, which he lost disastrously. So there we are. And I would add, by the way, that whilst Major was leading a government which was racked by scandal, he also had a scandal of his own, in the sense that it turned out that he had an extramarital relationship with another Conservative MP, even though, of course, he was married. And we never found out about that at the time, but undoubtedly a lot of people would have known about it. So prime ministers, British prime ministers, can survive scandals. Johnson has fallen not because there is a scandal, but because the economic picture is deteriorating in Britain, and it is deteriorating very fast, as it is throughout the West. People talk about a looming recession, But of course, so far as most people are concerned in Britain, with their living standards plunging, we are in recession already. People are already feeling that their living standards are falling. The government's popularity is falling, and of course, in scenes of extraordinary, almost comedic quality. And here I would suggest that if you want my discussion of this, you should go to our main channel, the Duran, where I've described it all in a live stream we've just done on the Duran with Alex Christoforou and Gonzalo Lira. The first couple of minutes were devoted to the bizarre events surrounding the fall of Boris Johnson. The fact is, though, that putting aside all the drama, the psychodrama that surrounded it, it is the collapse, the gathering collapse of the British economy and the growing sense throughout the Conservative Party and the political class that Johnson has no plan on how to deal with it that has resulted in the collapse of his political position. So that's where we are. That's what's caused Boris Johnson's fall. Now, let me repeat again. The event that has turned what was already a difficult inflation crisis that we already had at the start of this year into an all-encompassing crisis is the economic war of attrition that the West blundered into against Russia when they announced all those sanctions back in February. They didn't expect that the Russian economy would absorb the blow. They didn't anticipate that they would find themselves in an economic war of attrition. That's what they have. They're not prepared for it. Western economies are not in any shape to absorb these blows. They've done enormous damage on themselves by cutting themselves off from energy supplies from the country which was their historic and most reliable energy supply. At least that's been true in Europe. And the result is crisis. And since none of these governments, none of these leaders are prepared to break with these policies, confidence is draining away. And that confidence has now drained away from Boris Johnson and pulled him down. And we see that in the United States, Joe Biden's ratings are plunging, and most Americans, an overwhelming majority of Americans, don't want him to stand for a second term. And we see that in Germany, Olaf Scholz, whose own government's popularity is now falling fast, is making speeches which suggest that he's the leader of a country in crisis. And it isn't just that we're in a severe economic crisis. I mean, countries in the West have experienced economic crises before. This isn't unusual. But there is no clear sense from the leaders of these countries about what they're going to do to get us out. Because, of course, they're all committed to continuing this war in Ukraine until, well, I'm not sure until what exactly. Until Ukraine wins. Nobody really believes that anymore. Until Ukraine is in a stronger position to negotiate peace. But what if instead of getting stronger, Ukraine's position gets weaker and weaker because in spite of all these Western weapons, it continues to lose men and machines and territory, and the Russians continue to expand theirs. What are they going to do to end this war in Ukraine? What are they going to do to find energy supplies to substitute for the energy supplies that have already been lost? How are they going to replace all the metals? How are they going to replace the food? How are they going to rebuild all these broken supply lines? They don't know what to do. They don't have a plan to take us through this crisis. And the result is that is what, more even than the crisis itself, is leading to this crisis of confidence that we're seeing across the West. It's now had its effect in London, where we've seen the Prime Minister fall. But it's difficult to believe, if this continues for much longer, that he will be the only one. We have farmers' protests in the Netherlands. We've had a wave of strikes in Britain. We've had an election in France for the French Parliament, which saw the governing party of the French president lose its majority, in a sense, but leaving France with a parliament that frankly looks dysfunctional. And one gets the sense that in Germany also the mood is shifting and becoming increasingly somber, and that support is draining away. I saw an opinion poll coming out of Germany, by the way, which said that 47 of those polled would like to see peace immediately, even if that meant Ukraine surrendering territory, as against 41% who thought that Ukraine should never negotiate and give up any of its territory at all. So German opinion is tilting. At the beginning of the war, it was very strong in support of Ukraine. Today, as the economic problems mount, you can see a shift. But the political class, the government in Germany, it still doesn't have a clear way through. Now, sooner or later, something will have to break. Now, I don't know where that's going to be, but sooner or later, or when it's going to be, but something has to break. Maybe something will break in Russia. I don't see any sign of that. I don't think that's going to happen, but perhaps if, as some people expect, there's a recession and oil plunges to $40 a barrel, we're going to see the Russian economy break. I personally don't believe that. Oil prices have crashed in the past and Russia has sailed through. I don't believe that Russia is as dependent on oil prices and oil exports as people believe it is. I think it can sustain the war and maintain its economy even at oil prices of $25 a barrel. That's my own personal view. I think they could even go lower than that, and Russia would still be able to chunter along. Perhaps not as well, but it could keep going. And I'm not even sure that oil prices are going to fall to $40 a barrel, because even as I am making these programs, I hear that the Chinese are now looking to reflate their economy. They seem to be going for growth. And of course, if they do that, if other Asian states follow suit, well, that's going to cause oil prices to adjust. They may rise. Maybe if there's a recession in the West, the oil prices will still fall. But if Chinese demand remains strong, if Asian demand remains strong, unlikely oil prices will fall to $40 a barrel. Though you never know. With oil prices, anything is possible. But anyway, I don't think Russia's going to break. What's going to happen sooner or later is that there's going to be a break somewhere in the West. Might be in Europe, might happen with the midterms or after the midterms, might be in Germany. And apparently one German politician, or so I've read somewhere, has now for the first time broached the taboo subject of opening Nord Stream 2. I don't know whether that's true or not, by the way. The report that I read about that, I don't consider to be fully reliable. But I wonder whether perhaps, even if it wasn't actually said, some people in Germany are starting to think about it. But let me repeat again, unless there's a change of course over Ukraine, it's difficult to see how this situation can improve, at least decisively, anywhere in the West, and sooner or later a break somewhere is going to come. My guess is for what it's worth, that it will happen in the United States first. That's only a guess. I don't know. But in the meantime, people, not just in Ukraine, but across the West now, are paying increasingly the price for these misguided policies. And that makes it even more obvious, even more imperative, that what the West should do is talk finally about peace. Well, whether they will do that, how long it will take them to do that, that remains to be seen. But the longer they delay, the more certain it becomes that all of them, all of these leaders, will be following where Boris has led, into political oblivion. Thank you very much for joining me again today. I look forward to you joining me again in future programs, both on this channel and on our main channel, the Duran. Remember, you can find us on other platforms, especially locals and ODYSEE and SuperU and Rumble and all those other places. And of course, you can also support us via Patreon and Subscribe Star. You can come to our shop and buy the great things that you will find there. And last but not least, please remember, if you've liked this video, to press the like button and to check your subscription to this channel. Thank you for joining me again today. More from me soon, and have a very good day until then.